What would you do if a 12-year-old girl stood in court, looked a powerful judge straight in the eyes and said, "I can heal you"? Most people would laugh, some would roll their eyes, others would think she was crazy. But that's exactly what happened in a small courthouse in Greenville, South Carolina, on a humid Wednesday morning that no one would ever forget. The courtroom was silent except for the squeak of the judge's wheelchair as it rolled across the polished wooden floor. Judge Eleanor Whitmore, a stern, gray-haired woman with sharp blue eyes and a reputation for being merciless, adjusted her glasses and looked down at the young girl standing before her. The girl's name was Naomi Carter, a 12-year-old black girl with big, tear-filled brown eyes and worn-out sneakers. Her clothes were faded and her braids looked like they hadn't been done in weeks. She stood there clutching a crumpled piece of paper, a school report card, in her small hands. "Miss Carter," Judge Whitmore said, her voice cold and clipped, "do you understand why you're here?" Naomi nodded nervously, her heart pounded in her chest. She had never been inside a courtroom before. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. "Speak up," the judge ordered. "This is a court of law, not your playground." Naomi's voice trembled, but she spoke louder this time. "Yes, ma'am, I missed too many days of school, and they say my mama didn't come to court last time, so now I'm in trouble." The courtroom snickered. A few people sitting in the back shook their heads. The judge frowned, unimpressed. "Trouble, young lady, truancy is a serious matter. You cannot simply skip school because you feel like it. You are only 12 years old. What are you doing on the streets?" Naomi swallowed hard, trying not to cry. "I wasn't on the streets. I was home taking care of my little brother. He's sick. Mama works double shifts. I had to stay home." Judge Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "So you think taking care of your brother is more important than your education?" Naomi didn't answer at first. She stared down at her shoes. Her silence seemed to irritate the judge. "Answer the question." Naomi's small voice broke the silence. "Yes, because if I didn't, he wouldn't be here today." The words hung in the air, heavy and full of meaning. Judge Whitmore raised an eyebrow, her expression hardening. "Young lady, this court does not excuse truancy because of family hardship. The law is the law. Your mother will be fined, and if this continues, you may end up in foster care. Do you understand me?" That's when it happened. Naomi's fear turned to boldness. Her little hands clenched into fists, and for the first time she looked directly into the judge's eyes. "No," she said softly but firmly. The room gasped. Nobody ever said no to Judge Whitmore. "What did you just say?" the judge asked, her voice icy. "No," Naomi repeated, louder this time. "You can't take me away, and you can't keep mocking me for helping my family. I know you think I'm just some poor kid with no future. I can see it in your face, but you don't know me." The judge's lips pressed into a thin line. "Young lady, you will watch your tone in my courtroom." Naomi took a step forward, her small frame shaking but her voice growing stronger. "I can heal you." The courtroom went completely still. Even Judge Whitmore froze, blinking in disbelief. Then, slowly, she let out a sharp laugh. It wasn't a laugh of amusement, it was a laugh of disbelief, almost cruel. "Heal me," the judge repeated, laughing again. "What are you, a doctor now, a little street preacher? My dear girl, you don't even have perfect attendance at school and you think you can heal me." The spectators chuckled. The bailiff looked uncomfortable. Even the court clerk had to cover her mouth to hide a smirk. But Naomi didn't laugh, she didn't even flinch. "Yes," she said again, her voice unwavering. "I can heal you, I can make you walk again." The laughter died down instantly. The judge's smirk faded. Her hand froze on the armrest of her wheelchair. For the first time that morning, she didn't look like the powerful, untouchable judge everyone feared. She looked human, vulnerable. Judge Whitmore had been paralyzed from the waist down for 5 years after a car accident took the life of her husband. She never spoke about it in public, but everyone in town knew. It was the one topic no one dared to mention in her courtroom. And here was a little girl, a poor, ragged little girl, staring her down, saying she could heal her. "Bailiff," Judge Whitmore said finally, her voice tight, "remove her from my courtroom now." The bailiff, a tall man named Officer Brooks, hesitated. "Your Honor, she's just a child." "Now," the judge barked, her face turning red. Officer Brooks walked toward Naomi, but the girl didn't move. "Please, just let me try," Naomi pleaded. I know you don't believe me, nobody ever does, but I can do it. I can help you walk again. God gave me this gift for a reason. The judge glared at her, but deep down, something in those words pierced through her walls. She quickly masked her emotions, but her fingers gripped her wheelchair's armrests so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Take her out, she said again, her voice shaking slightly this time. Officer Brooks gently placed a hand on Naomi's shoulder. Naomi's eyes welled up with tears. Why won't you let me help you? She asked, her voice breaking. You're angry at the world because of what happened to you, but you don't have to stay angry, you don't have to stay this way. That last sentence made Judge Whitmore flinch. Officer Brooks led Naomi out of the courtroom, but as the doors closed behind her, the judge sat there frozen, staring at the empty spot where Naomi had stood. For the first time in years, Eleanor Whitmore felt something she thought she had buried long ago, hope and fear. That night Judge Whitmore couldn't sleep. She tried to focus on her case files, but Naomi's words echoed in her mind over and over, I can heal you. She looked at her legs, the same legs that hadn't moved in 5 years. Could it be possible? Could a child really? She shook her head. Ridiculous, she muttered to herself. She's just a child, she doesn't know what she's talking about. But deep down a small voice whispered, what if she does? Meanwhile, Naomi sat on the porch of her family's rundown apartment, holding her little brother Micah in her arms. He coughed softly, resting his head on her shoulder. Did the judge let you go? Micah asked weakly. Naomi nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, she didn't believe me though. Micah's big brown eyes looked up at her. But you can heal her, right? Yes, Naomi said, stroking his hair. I just need one more chance. And deep down she knew she would get it. Because fate was about to bring Naomi and Judge Whitmore together again, in a way neither of them could have ever imagined. The next morning, Judge Eleanor Whitmore sat at the edge of her bed, staring out the window as the first light of dawn crept into her house. Her home was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. She ran a hand over her legs just as she did every morning, cold, motionless, useless. She hated mornings the most because it was the moment she remembered all over again that this was her life now. No husband, no children, no ability to walk. But this morning felt different. Naomi's voice still echoed in her head. I can heal you, I can make you walk again. Eleanor squeezed her eyes shut. It's nonsense, she muttered, it's nothing but a desperate child's fantasy. But the way Naomi had said it, the way she had looked at her, haunted her. Naomi didn't sound like she was bluffing, she didn't look like she was just trying to avoid punishment. There had been something in her eyes, something Eleanor hadn't seen in years. Conviction. Later that day, Judge Whitmore returned to the courthouse. She rolled into her chambers, shut the door, and stared at the phone on her desk. She had a choice to make. If she called Child Protective Services, Naomi might be put in foster care, maybe separated from her sick brother. That was the proper legal thing to do, but something inside her hesitated. Instead, she picked up the phone and dialed a different number. Officer Brooks, she said when he answered, I need you to find that little girl from yesterday, Naomi Carter, bring her to my office, quietly. There was a pause on the other end. Your Honor, Brooks said carefully, may I ask why? That's none of your concern, Eleanor snapped, just do it. Yes, ma'am. Naomi was sitting in the small kitchen of her apartment when there was a knock on the door. Her mother, Danielle Carter, answered, still wearing her diner uniform and smelling faintly of coffee and grease. When she saw the uniformed officer standing there, her face turned pale. Is something wrong? She asked quickly. Relax, ma'am, Officer Brooks said kindly. I'm not here to arrest anyone, the judge just wants to see Naomi, privately. Danielle's eyes widened. Privately, what for? She didn't say, Brooks admitted. Danielle hesitated, then turned to Naomi. Baby, go get your jacket. Naomi obeyed, her heart pounding. When Naomi arrived at Judge Whitmore's chambers, she was surprised to find the judge alone. No spectators, no court clerks, no lawyers, just the judge sitting in her wheelchair staring out the window. Naomi swallowed hard. Am I in trouble? Eleanor turned slowly to face her. No, she said quietly, you're not in trouble. Naomi took a cautious step closer. You said something to me yesterday, the judge continued. something no one has dared say to me in years. Naomi nodded. Yes, ma'am. You told me you could heal me. Yes, ma'am. And you believe that? Naomi's voice didn't waver. I don't just believe it, I know it. Aliner's lips pressed together. And how exactly do you think you would do that? Magic, prayer, some secret ritual? Prayer, Naomi said simply, and faith. God gave me this gift after my brother got sick. Doctors said he wouldn't make it through the night. I prayed for him, I begged God to let him stay, and by morning he was breathing again. He got better. And since then I've prayed for other people too. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but I believe if I pray for you, you'll walk again. Aliner scoffed. Child, do you have any idea how many doctors I've seen? Surgeons, specialists, physical therapists. If they couldn't fix me, what makes you think you can? Naomi didn't flinch, because they don't know God like I do. The judge's chest tightened. She hated how that sentence made something inside her ache. Do you know how ridiculous that sounds? Aliner said sharply. Yes, Naomi admitted, but I also know you wouldn't have called me here if you didn't want to believe it, even just a little. That stopped Aliner cold. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then very slowly Aliner said, all right, show me. Naomi's heart leapt. Right now. Yes, Aliner said, her voice steady. If you really think you can do this, prove it. Naomi walked closer until she stood right in front of the wheelchair. She knelt on the floor, closed her eyes, and placed her small hands gently on the judge's knees. Dear God, Naomi whispered, you see Judge Whitmore, you know her pain, you know how angry she's been since the accident. Please touch her legs right now. Please show her that you still love her, that you still see her. Please make her walk again. The room was silent. Naomi stayed there praying softly, her hands trembling. Aliner stared down at her, her throat tightening. She wanted to laugh, wanted to tell Naomi this was pointless, but something about the child's sincerity made the words catch in her throat. For the first time in years, Aliner closed her eyes and let someone pray for her. When Naomi finished, she looked up. Try to move your foot, she said softly. Aliner almost snapped that it was impossible, but something in Naomi's gaze made her obey. She focused on her right foot. Nothing. Then so faintly she almost didn't notice, her big toe twitched. Her heart stopped. She tried again, this time her foot jerked slightly. Her breath caught in her chest. No, she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. No, that's not possible, I haven't felt anything in years. Naomi smiled, tears streaming down her face. It's working. Aliner stared at her own foot, her hands flying to her mouth. For the first time in years she felt hope, not just in her heart but in her body. But just as quickly, fear gripped her. What are you doing to me? She demanded, her voice shaking. Is this some kind of trick? Are you trying to manipulate me? Naomi looked hurt. No, ma'am, I'm just doing what God told me to do. Aliner turned her wheelchair toward the door, her emotions all over the place. You need to leave, now. Naomi hesitated, but... Leave, Aliner shouted, her voice breaking. Naomi stood up slowly, her face full of sadness. I'll come back, she said softly. You can be mad at me, but I know what I saw. God's not done with you yet. Then she turned and walked out. Aliner sat there alone, staring at her trembling foot, tears welling in her eyes. For the first time since the accident, she didn't know whether to feel terrified or grateful. Judge Aliner Whitmore barely slept that night. She kept staring at her feet, her moving feet, as if they might stop working again if she looked away. Every so often she would try to wiggle her toes. Each time they obeyed, weakly, faintly, but they moved. At 3 a.m., she sat in her wheelchair in the middle of her living room, trembling. What if it's real? The thought terrified her more than anything. She had spent 5 years accepting that this was her life now, that she would never walk again, that she would always be angry and bitter. She had built her entire identity around being untouchable, unbreakable, unmovable. And now, a 12-year-old girl was shattering everything she thought she knew. The next morning, Aliner canceled her court sessions. She claimed she was feeling unwell, which wasn't entirely a lie. Her chest felt like it was caving in from the storm of emotions. But instead of resting, she rolled herself into her bedroom, locked the door, and faced the thing she feared the most. Her walker. It had been sitting in the corner for years, gathering dust. A painful reminder of all the failed attempts, all the tears, all the humiliations. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. Slowly, painfully, she locked the brakes on her wheelchair, shifted her weight forward and grabbed the walker with both hands. Her arms trembled under the effort, her legs felt heavy, almost foreign. Then, gritting her teeth, she pushed down on the walker and tried to stand. For a moment nothing happened. Then with a sharp gasp, she felt her right knee lock. Then her left. And before she knew it, she was upright. She was standing. Her whole body shook, she clung to the walker as tears streamed down her face. I'm standing. 5 years of pain and bitterness melted into the carpet under her bare feet. She took one shaky step forward. Then another. By the third step she collapsed back into the wheelchair, sobbing uncontrollably. But she didn't care. Because for the first time in half a decade she knew that she could walk again. Later that afternoon, Officer Brooks stopped by her office with case files. You okay, Judge? He asked, noticing the redness around her eyes. I'm fine, Eleanor said quickly, wiping her face. Better than fine. He hesitated. You've been different since yesterday. That girl, did she upset you? Eleanor paused, then said quietly, bring her back here. Meanwhile, Naomi was sitting at the kitchen table helping her brother Micah with his homework when Officer Brooks knocked again. Your Honor wants to see you, he told Naomi. Naomi's heart skipped. She does. Yes, and this time she didn't sound angry. When Naomi walked into Judge Whitmore's chambers, she immediately noticed something different. The judge looked softer, her hair was down, her usually sharp face looked almost gentle. You came, Eleanor said. You asked me to, Naomi replied. Eleanor hesitated, then gestured toward the empty chair in front of her desk. Sit. Naomi obeyed. The judge took a deep breath. I owe you an apology. Naomi blinked in surprise. You do? Yes, Eleanor said quietly. Yesterday I mocked you, I laughed at you, I thought you were just another desperate child trying to get out of trouble, but after you left something happened. Naomi's eyes widened. You felt it too. Eleanor nodded slowly. Yes, I moved my foot, and this morning I stood up for the first time since the accident. Naomi broke into a wide, tearful smile. I told you. Eleanor looked down at her hands. You don't understand. I've spent 5 years telling myself there was no hope, and suddenly, because of you, I feel like my entire life has been turned upside down. I don't know whether to thank you or be terrified of you. Naomi reached across the desk and touched the judge's hand. Don't be scared, God's just not finished with you yet. Those words hit Eleanor harder than she expected. She swallowed hard. Do it again, she whispered. Whatever you did yesterday, do it again. Naomi nodded, stood up and walked around the desk. She knelt in front of the judge once more, placed her hands on her knees and prayed out loud. This time, Eleanor didn't fight the tears. She let them fall as Naomi prayed for her healing, her heart, her anger, and her pain. When Naomi finished, she whispered, try again. Eleanor grabbed the edge of her desk, braced herself, and slowly rose to her feet. This time she stayed standing. She took one step, then two. By the third, she was crying and laughing at the same time. Naomi clapped her hands. I knew it. Eleanor fell back into her chair, breathless and overwhelmed. You have no idea what this means to me, she said, wiping her tears. Yes, I do, Naomi said softly, because I know what it feels like to think nobody's coming to save you. But their moment of joy was cut short when the door suddenly opened. Danielle Carter, Naomi's mother, stood there, her face pale and worried. What is going on here? She demanded. Why does my daughter keep coming to this courthouse? Eleanor froze. Naomi stood quickly. Mama, it's okay, I was just... No, it is not okay, Danielle snapped. She's 12 years old, Your Honor, 12. If she's in trouble, put it on me, not her. Eleanor opened her mouth to explain, but Danielle wasn't finished. I have been working double shifts to keep a roof over our heads. I don't have time for games. Whatever this is, it needs to stop. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. But Mama, I helped her. She stood up today. Danielle looked skeptical. What? Eleanor took a deep breath, then slowly, painfully, pushed herself out of her wheelchair. Danielle gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. I'm not healed completely, Eleanor said quietly, but I can stand, and it's because of your daughter. Danielle's legs nearly gave out. she grabbed the back of the chair to steady herself. For a long moment the room was silent. Then Danielle sat down heavily, tears running down her face. "Naomi, what have you been doing?" "Just what God told me to," Naomi said simply. Danielle looked at Alina, then back at her daughter. She shook her head speechless. "Miraculous," Alina finished for her. But not everyone would see it that way. Word about what had happened was starting to spread around the courthouse. Some people were whispering that the judge had lost her mind. Others were calling Naomi a fraud, saying she was just playing with people's emotions. The media caught wind of the story. Reporters started hanging around outside the courthouse, hoping to catch a glimpse of the girl who made the judge walk. And suddenly, what had been a private moment of hope was about to become a very public spectacle. The next morning, the courthouse was surrounded by reporters. Cameras flashed, news vans lined the street, microphones were shoved into Officer Brooks' face as soon as he stepped out of his car. "Officer, is it true?" the judge stood up for the first time in 5 years. "Is there really a little girl claiming to have healed her? Is this a miracle or just a publicity stunt?" Brooks said nothing, just pushed through the crowd and entered the building. Inside, Judge Alina Whitmore was sitting at her desk, looking pale. Her phone buzzed every few minutes with calls from news outlets, local pastors, and even old friends who hadn't spoken to her since before the accident. Some wanted to celebrate with her. Some wanted to question her. Some wanted to tear her down. Alina shut her phone off and buried her face in her hands. Naomi and her mother arrived an hour later, slipping quietly through the back entrance to avoid the crowd. When they entered the judge's chambers, Alina looked up, relief flooding her face. "You came," she said. Danielle crossed her arms. "Only because I don't want my daughter dragged into some media circus. Whatever this is, Your Honor, it's getting out of control." Alina nodded. "I know, I didn't expect word to spread this fast." "You didn't expect it?" Danielle said, incredulous. "You're a sitting judge, you think people wouldn't notice if you suddenly started walking again." Naomi stayed quiet, her hands clenched at her sides. "Mrs. Carter," Alina said gently, "I don't want to exploit your daughter, I don't want to hide what happened either." Danielle frowned. "And what exactly did happen?" Alina hesitated, then did something bold. She grabbed the edge of her desk and stood up slowly but steadily. Danielle gasped again, tears welling in her eyes. "It's real," Alina said softly. I can take a few steps, and I owe it to Naomi." Naomi's face broke into a proud smile. But Danielle wasn't smiling, she looked worried. "If you go public with this," she said, "they're going to put cameras in my baby's face, they'll follow her to school, they'll treat her like some sideshow act." "I know," Alina admitted, "but maybe that's the point, maybe the world needs to see this." By lunchtime the news was everywhere. Miracle in Greenville Courthouse was trending on Twitter. Talk shows debated whether it was divine intervention or a psychological breakthrough. One clip of Naomi leaving the courthouse went viral with the caption, "This little girl claims she healed a judge, do you believe her?" The comments section was brutal. "She's lying, this is all fake. Where's the proof, let's see the judge walk. Exploiting a child for attention, disgusting. She's just a kid, leave her alone." Naomi scrolled through the comments on her mom's old phone and felt her stomach twist. "Mama, they think I'm lying," she whispered. Danielle pulled her close. "Let them talk, baby. People will say anything when they're scared of something they don't understand." Back at the courthouse, Alina made a decision that would change everything. She called a press conference. The next morning the courthouse lobby was packed, reporters from across the state had gathered, cameras were rolling. Naomi stood nervously next to her mother, clutching her hand. Alina wheeled herself onto the small platform at the front of the room, her heart pounded in her chest. "Good morning," she said into the microphone, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "Many of you have heard the rumors, I am here to tell you that they are true." A ripple went through the crowd. 5 years ago I was paralyzed from the waist down in a car accident. Every doctor told me I would never walk again, but 2 days ago something extraordinary happened. A 12-year-old girl prayed for me and I felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years. She paused, gripping the sides of her wheelchair. "I felt my legs." The room fell silent. Some of you will say this is impossible, that I am imagining it, that this is just wishful thinking. She took a deep breath. That's why I'm going to show you. And with that, Alina stood up. The crowd gasped, cameras flashed wildly. She took one shaky step forward, then another. By the third step, tears were streaming down her face. This is not fake, she said, her voice breaking. This is not a publicity stunt, this is real, and it happened because of this young girl right here. She gestured to Naomi, who froze as dozens of cameras turned toward her. The crowd erupted, some clapping, some crying, some shouting questions. Naomi, how did you do it? Are you a faith healer? Do you plan to heal others? Naomi's face turned red, she wasn't used to this kind of attention. All she could manage to say was, God did it, not me. That night, the clip of Alina standing went viral across the country. Some called it a miracle, others called it a scam. A well-known TV pastor invited Alina and Naomi to speak at his megachurch. A medical team from Duke University reached out asking to study Alina's recovery. But not everyone was supportive. One powerful local attorney accused Alina of staging the whole thing for sympathy votes in the upcoming election for Chief Justice. If she's suddenly walking, he said on the news, she must have been lying about the severity of her injury all along. This calls her integrity as a judge into question. Alina watched the clip on TV, her hands trembling with anger. I have spent 5 years in this wheelchair, she said through gritted teeth. I never lied. Naomi placed a small hand on hers, then don't let them make you feel guilty for what God did. But things were about to get worse. The following week, protesters gathered outside the courthouse, some demanding proof, others calling Naomi a false prophet. Danielle grew more and more worried about her daughter's safety. This has to stop, she told Alina one afternoon. You need to call this off before someone gets hurt. Alina shook her head. I can't call this off. If I stay silent now, they win, and this miracle wasn't meant to stay hidden. She turned to Naomi. I need you, Naomi. I need you to keep helping me, because if I can walk fully again, no one will be able to deny what happened. Naomi nodded slowly. Then we'll keep praying until you can run if we have to. Alina smiled faintly, her heart swelling with a strange mixture of fear and faith. Because deep down she knew Naomi was right, this was far from over. By the following Monday, things had gone from strange to dangerous. The courthouse parking lot was filled with protesters carrying signs. Some read, Miracle in Greenville. Believe NAOMI. God still heals. But others read, Stop the fraud. Walk or resign. Judicial scam. Judge Alina Whitmore sat in her office, staring at a letter on her desk. It was from the Judicial Ethics Commission. Dear Judge Whitmore, in light of recent media attention surrounding your alleged miraculous recovery, the Commission will hold a formal inquiry to determine whether you have misrepresented your disability status or misled the court in prior cases. Your presence is mandatory. Her chest tightened as she crumpled the letter in her fist. If the Commission decided she had lied even unintentionally, she could lose her seat on the bench. Everything she had worked for her entire life could be gone. Naomi arrived with her mother a few minutes later. She found Alina sitting in silence, gripping her wheelchair so tightly her knuckles were white. Judge, Naomi asked softly. Alina looked up, her eyes glistening. They're calling a hearing, they think I faked this whole thing. Naomi frowned, but you didn't. I know, Alina said bitterly, but they don't believe me, and now they want me to prove it in front of an entire panel of judges, attorneys, and reporters. Naomi walked closer, her small voice steady. Then we prove it in front of everyone. Alina gave a humorless laugh. Naomi, I can barely take 6 steps before collapsing. If I stumble, if I fall, they'll think I'm lying. Then we keep praying, Naomi said firmly. Every day until the hearing, you're stronger than you think. And that's exactly what they did. Every afternoon after school, Naomi came to the courthouse or to Alina's home. They prayed together. Some days Alina felt stronger, her legs holding her up for nearly a full minute. Other days she felt like nothing was happening at all. One night alone in her room she broke down. Why would you start something you won't finish? She cried into the dark. why let me hope if you're just going to let them humiliate me? But somewhere deep inside, she heard Naomi's words echoing. God's not done with you yet. And she knew she had to keep going. The day of the inquiry came faster than Alina expected. The hearing room was packed. Local and national news crews were filming. A row of stern-faced commissioners sat at a long table. Danielle sat in the audience, holding Naomi's hand tightly. When Alina rolled into the room, whispers filled the air. Will she walk? Was it all fake? Is this her last day as a judge? Alina swallowed hard and took her place at the front. Judge Whitmore, the head commissioner began, you have been summoned to this inquiry to address concerns that your recent claims of recovery may constitute a misrepresentation of your medical condition in past legal proceedings. Do you have a statement? Alina took a deep breath and gripped the arms of her wheelchair. Yes, I do, she said, her voice strong despite the lump in her throat. For 5 years I was told I would never walk again. I lived with that reality every single day. But 2 weeks ago something happened that no doctor can explain. She looked toward Naomi, who nodded encouragingly. This young girl prayed for me, and for the first time in half a decade I felt movement in my legs. A murmur went through the crowd. Many of you think this is fake, that I am lying, so today I will show you the truth. Slowly she placed her hands on the wheelchair's arms, braced herself and stood up. Gasps filled the room, cameras flashed. She took one step. Then another. Then another. Her legs shook violently but she kept going. By the 6th step she was trembling all over, sweat pouring down her face. The commissioners stared in stunned silence. Then, just before she collapsed, she grabbed the edge of the table and stood there, breathing hard but smiling through her tears. This is not a fraud, she said, her voice breaking. This is a miracle. The room erupted, reporters shouting questions, people clapping, some crying openly. But not everyone was moved. The attorney who had accused her earlier stood up. Convenient timing, Judge Whitmore, he said coldly. But this doesn't prove anything. Anyone can stand if they're pretending. What we want to know is why you let the public believe you were completely paralyzed for years if this was possible all along. Alina glared at him. Because it wasn't possible until now. I tried everything. Physical therapy, surgeries, experimental treatments, nothing worked. And now, thanks to this little girl, I can do what the doctors said I never would. That is the truth. Naomi stood up suddenly. You don't have to believe her, she said loudly. But you saw it with your own eyes. She stood up, she walked. God did that, not her, not me, him. The room went silent again. For a moment no one spoke. Then one of the commissioners, an older man with gray hair, leaned forward. Judge Whitmore, he said slowly, I have known you for 20 years. You are not a woman who seeks attention. If you say this is real, I believe you. Several of the other commissioners nodded. The lead commissioner cleared her throat. We will deliberate and issue a formal statement within 24 hours. This hearing is adjourned. As the room emptied, reporters swarmed Alina and Naomi. How do you feel right now? What happens if the commission rules against you? Naomi, will you be healing others now? Naomi clung to her mother, as Danielle guided her through the crowd. Alina followed slowly, her legs still trembling but her heart strangely light. I did it, she whispered to herself as she reached the hallway. I actually did it. That night, news stations replayed the footage over and over. Judge Whitmore rising from her wheelchair. Naomi smiling through tears. The packed room gasping in disbelief. And for the first time since this began, public opinion started to shift. People on social media began sharing words like faith, miracle, and hope. But in the shadows, Alina knew there were still people rooting for her downfall, people who would do anything to prove this was fake. And the fight was far from over. The next morning, Naomi woke up to find a threatening note shoved under their apartment door. Stop lying or we'll make you stop. Her hands shook as she showed it to her mother. Danielle's face turned pale. We're going to the police, she said firmly. But Naomi shook her head. No, we're going to the judge, she needs to know. Because whatever was coming next, it was clear they were in this together. Have you ever had to risk everything to defend the truth, even your life? That's exactly what Naomi and Judge Alina were about to face. The morning after the inquiry, Alina was awakened by a call from her clerk. Judge Whitmore, the commission has reached its decision. They'll announce it publicly this afternoon at 4 p.m. Her stomach twisted, this was it. But before she could even process the news, her doorbell rang. It was Danielle and Naomi, and Danielle's face was pale. Judge, someone left this at our apartment last night. She handed Alina the crumpled paper. Stop lying or we'll make you stop. Alina's blood ran cold. Did you call the police? Danielle nodded. They said they'd look into it, but you know how this goes, it's just a threat until it is. Naomi stood there quietly, her small fists clenched. I'm not afraid, she said suddenly. They can threaten me all they want, but I know what I saw, I know what God did. Alina felt tears sting her eyes. You shouldn't have to be this brave, Naomi. Maybe not, Naomi said softly, but if I give up now, then it's like saying it never happened. That afternoon, the courthouse steps were filled with reporters and crowds on both sides. Some carried signs saying, "We believe the judge. Naomi is our hero." Others shouted insults, calling them liars and frauds. When Alina arrived with Naomi and Danielle, the shouting grew louder. Suddenly, from somewhere in the crowd, a rock flew past Alina's shoulder and smashed against the courthouse wall. Security immediately rushed them inside, but Alina could feel Naomi shaking as she held her hand. This is getting dangerous, Danielle whispered. We need protection. No, Naomi said through gritted teeth. We need the truth to win. At 4 p.m. sharp, the commission filed into the hearing room. The crowd was silent as the lead commissioner stood. After careful consideration of the evidence presented and the testimony given, she began, the commission finds no evidence that Judge Whitmore misrepresented her medical condition or committed fraud. A collective gasp filled the room. Furthermore, the commissioner continued, the commission formally acknowledges the extraordinary nature of Judge Whitmore's partial recovery and commends her courage in appearing before this body to demonstrate it publicly. The room erupted in cheers. Danielle broke down crying and hugged Naomi so tightly she nearly lifted her off the ground. Alina just stood there stunned and then smiled through her tears. It was over. She had been cleared. Her reputation was safe. But before she could even breathe a sigh of relief, something unbelievable happened. A woman from the back of the room stood up. She was elderly, frail-looking, with a cane in her hand. Excuse me, she called out. All eyes turned to her. Is this the little girl? She asked, pointing to Naomi. Yes, Alina said carefully. The woman hobbled forward. Child, my doctor says I'll never walk without this cane again. Would you pray for me? The room went dead silent. Naomi's eyes widened, and she looked at her mother. Danielle nodded slowly. Go ahead, baby. Naomi stepped forward, her heart pounding. She placed her small hands on the woman's shoulders and whispered, Jesus, if you could help Judge Alina walk, then please help this lady too. Amen. Nothing happened at first. Then before everyone's eyes, the old woman's knees stopped shaking. She let go of her cane. Took one step. Then another. The room gasped as she dropped the cane entirely and walked across the room, tears streaming down her face. Reporters were sobbing, cameras were flashing like fireworks. And for the first time, even Alina, the woman who had doubted more than anyone, fell to her knees and wept. Outside, the crowd that had been divided just hours earlier now cheered Naomi's name. Social media exploded with videos from inside the room. Naomi miracle trended worldwide within hours. Alina stood on the courthouse steps, Naomi's small hand in hers, and faced the cameras. I became a judge because I believed in truth and justice, Alina said, her voice steady. But today I saw something greater than justice. I saw mercy, I saw grace, and I saw the power of a faith I didn't even know I needed. She looked down at Naomi and smiled. This little girl taught me that hope isn't just for the innocent or the guilty, it's for everyone. The crowd erupted in applause. That evening, Alina invited Naomi and Danielle to her house for dinner. For the first time since her accident, Alina cooked standing up, tears streaming down her face as she stirred a pot of pasta. Naomi sat at the kitchen counter grinning. You're walking better every day. I am, Alina admitted, and I owe that to you. No, Naomi said softly, you owe that to God, he just used me to show you. Alina smiled through her tears. Then I guess he used you to save my life, not just my legs. Months later, Alina continued to improve. She could walk short distances without help, and every step felt like a miracle. But more importantly, she was different. She started volunteering at youth programs, mentoring kids from struggling neighborhoods. She invited Naomi to speak at a community event, where hundreds of people came to hear her story. And every time Alina looked at her, she thought about the day in that courtroom when a 12-year-old girl's faith changed everything. On the anniversary of her recovery, Alina held a small gathering at the courthouse. Naomi stood beside her as she addressed the room. 1 year ago, I mocked this little girl, Alina said, her voice breaking. I called her a liar, I dismissed her faith, but because she didn't give up even when I humiliated her, I am standing here today. Naomi reminded me that miracles still happen, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one speaking the greatest truth. The room gave them a standing ovation. Naomi blushed and smiled shyly. And Alina thought to herself, sometimes the judge isn't the one giving the verdict, sometimes the verdict comes from above.